Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Hannah Orif, and I work with Springfield Community Gardens. We are a nonprofit based in Springfield, Missouri, whose vision is a community where everyone has access to healthy and local food. We currently operate 17 community gardens, 3 urban farms, and a commercial test kitchen, and a community food forest. This workshop on composting benefits to your farm and garden is generously funded by the 2501 grant from the USDA Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement. We are joined tonight by Justine Francesca, Board President of Springfield Compost Collective. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment, but first some housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions throughout this workshop, please ask as we go. There is a Q&A button as well as a chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A section so that we may answer them as we go along. Try to use the chat feature for comments only. That way we can keep track of questions throughout the night. Also, once you leave this workshop, a screen will pop up with a link to a post-workshop survey. This survey is used in Springfield Community Gardens reporting to the USDA and also helps us provide meaningful workshops in the future. We would also appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to fill that survey out after this workshop. If you would like to refer to this workshop later, it will be available at Springfield Community Gardens Agricultural Workshop playlist on our YouTube channel by the end of the week. I'll put that link as well as our website, social media, and tonight's exit survey in the chat in a moment. All right, that's all from me. Thank you again for being here tonight. And now I'm going to hand it off to Justine.
All right, thank you, Hannah. Just to make sure you can hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
All right, great. Well, if we come across any technical errors, please, put something in the chat and let us know. So thank you again for joining us for composting benefits on your farm and garden. Thank you, Springfield Community Gardens, for having us, and we really appreciate the partnership with you all. So let's get started. Okay, a little bit about myself. I have a background in sustainable agriculture and plant science, with definitely an emphasis in soil life and composting, which I've been practicing for over 10 years now, along with sustainable and regenerative farming. I currently am a manager of a 3-acre farm where we do market farming and CSA production, along with we're starting community composting as well. I'm a master gardener. I've done the Life in the Soils certification, Soil Food Web certification with Dr. Elaine Ingham. And then I used to work with the community gardens. And I am the president and co-founder of Springfield Compost Collective. And then I've, gotten a few certifications on the way. I am constantly loving to learn different things, and especially around soil and the composting world. And the composting world has just blown up in the last 4 years, and I'm so excited. So there's always new research becoming available for it. So let's get started here. One thing I would love to know with people who are attending, and I'm not sure how I can see you all, but I would like to know if you have attended in Compost Collective workshop before. If you have, please let me know. And then if you are attending for composting on a farm or for a home garden, or like a medium size, a small garden, like what is your situation for composting? And I would love to know that. So please put that in the chat so I can get to know you a little bit better. So what we're going to go over is how and why of composting, the microorganisms, the fungi, and their importance in compost and soil, regenerative practice, trying to showcase when we have really good compost, the nutritional value for the plants that we consume, and we're going to show you some of that as well. So, what is compost? Which I always like to start with, and just to kind of recap on everything, compost is a decomposition process of organic matter in an aerobic setting, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. And then something I always like to say myself is that it is just a natural recycling process that gives life and energy back to the earth. It exists all around us. And that's a great way to look at it, in terms of the fact that we all can do it. It exists around us, and we can look to nature, into the forest to learn how to do it best. So let's get into the why of composting a little bit. And these posters you're seeing have been provided by the Institute of Local Self-Reliance, and they are a wonderful resource for community members, for teachers, for nonprofits. You can use almost everything on their website as long as you give them credit for for what you're using. And then they have tons of resources as far as educational videos and certifications for learning more about composting, or how to start your own composting operation. It's really a great organization, and if you haven't ever looked into what they're doing, I would definitely check them out. While we go over this, I also would love to know, like, why you want to compost yourself. So, please let me know that. And after we go over these posters, hopefully I can read a little bit about why you all want to compost. So, a little bit of numbers here about composting and what it impacts, and why it's so important. When I read these statistics, it really helps to motivate me to continue composting and continue the education and spreading the word of composting as a solution for some of the issues that we're having to deal with right now in our country and around the world. Right now, we are looking at 50% of the typical garbage that's set outside on the curb can be diverted through a composting system. So 21% of that is food scraps. And this is on a nationwide scale. I will show you local numbers here in a second. But 15% is paper, 8% is yard trimmings, and then, and then 8% is another other waste that we could compost. So 50% of what we're putting out on the curb could go into a composting system instead of into our landfills, which is contributing to greenhouse gases, and gases, which I feel like this is a very, very big number for us, and we can definitely be able to accomplish them. So compost enhances soil and protects you here in this infographic. I think it's really great too for the Springfield area, because Springfield is surrounded by waterways, and we take lots of pride in making sure that we protect those and keep them, clean. And compost, the finished product, is one way to help do that. Applying it to grasslands and all over the city where there's grass. And the reason why I believe this could have such an impact in our city is that compost helps reduce stormwater runoff by because it can hold its weight, 5 times its weight in water. So it can help decrease with the flooding issues that sometimes are present in Springfield. It also helps filter out chemicals and pollutants. Co- um, excuse me. Compost enhances microbial activity, which we're going to talk about. It increases soil fertility. It improves the soil structure. It helps keep our crops drought tolerant, which is really important for coming up times where we might have less rain or longer durations without rain. It helps suppress diseases. It protects our soil from erosions. It really is a wonderful end product that we should be spreading throughout the country on our grasslands and in the city. So some local numbers in Springfield. So Springfield produces 1,000 to 1,200 tons of waste daily. 12% of that is food waste, and then over 120 tons of food waste every day going into the landfill. And these numbers are really big, and sometimes they're really hard to understand, like, what does that even look like? So we've done some math here, and it's equivalent to 60 cars every day driving into the landfill and staying there forever. And that's just food waste. So, that's why we're working so hard to get that food waste into another system, a truly recycling system of turning it into compost to give back to the community and get that out of the landfill. Okay, so I don't know if anyone is in the chat or has told us a little bit about what type of composting system they're looking for, or like if they're on a farm or garden, or if they've been in a workshop before. But Hannah, if you could let me know
Yeah,
if anyone.
Connie Kirkpatrick posted in the Q&A, it's a refresher for me. I've been composting for a family garden for 25 years. If anybody has any other anything else to say, feel free to put it in the Q&A or in the chat.
Okay. Well, awesome. It sounds like there is definitely almost an expert. So 20, that's a long time. Hopefully I have some good information for you. So let's go over a little bit about composting. We talked about how it protects the climate, and this graphic right here tells you about a research project that was done in California, where they laid a half an inch of compost on grassland, and they found that it helped to sequester 1 metric ton of CO2 per hectares over 3 years. And to understand what that means is their next graphic talks about how this level of sequestration that they had would offset 42 million metric tons. But those numbers are hard to understand. Basically, what they're saying is it could offset the equivalent of annual greenhouse emissions from California's commercial and residential energy sectors, just by applying half an inch of compost to this rangeland that was in Marin County, so in California. And that is huge. I mean, now we have a solution of offsetting our greenhouse gases and pulling that carbon back into the soil where it belongs through the application of composting. And another amazing reason to make compost and apply it to your gardens and your yard, and like spread the word on it being a solution for our global greenhouse gases issues. Another thing that we're really trying to push as far as with the compost collective is that composting creates jobs. And that's another graphic that you can see up there, is that on a per ton basis, making compost alone employs 2 times more workers than landfills and 4 times more than incinerators. And our compost organization is very small. We only have 2 paid employees at the moment, but we are trying to push for, being able to have more job opportunities. It just takes more people signing on board for our service and more businesses signing on board. But throughout the country, community composting is taking off, and it is creating more jobs. So another way to, support green jobs is supporting composting. And then something that I always like to discuss at this section, we can discuss a little bit more about, is that composting on your farm or in your garden actually leads to saving you money. If you are on a large scale farm, it is much more cost savings to make your own compost than to buy it. And for me, it's because the quality of compost that you can buy somewhere, sometimes if it's in a reasonable range, say like, sometimes you see anywhere from 30 to 50 dollars a cubic yard. Normally when I look at that compost under a microscope or analyze it in person, it's not the greatest quality. and the price reflects that, which is fine. At that point, it could just be a really good mulch for your garden, but it doesn't have a lot of microbial life in it. Compost that can guarantee lots of microbial life, therefore lots of nutrient exchange for your garden, is going to be upwards of $50 to $75 a cubic yard. And to do large purchases of that for your farm and garden is very expensive. So being able to instead pay a employee of your farm, a 2 extra hours a week specifically for turning compost or making compost, definitely is a saver in cost than having to purchase large amounts of compost every year. So another reason why to make compost on your farm or at home. So we're going to run through a little bit about composting and what you need to compost, how to make good compost. And what I want to focus on is soil life, compost life, the relationships between these regenerative practices, and how to incorporate that into your garden through making good compost. So let's go over compost making real quick. So compost needs 4 key ingredients, which is carbon, nitrogen, water, and oxygen. And carbon is your browns, nitrogen is going to be your green, and then water and oxygen. And everyone always asks me, well, why do we need these elements and why are they so important? And learning about these elements and they're important and why they're so important is key to making good compost, because instead of telling you a specific recipe for composting, I want you to know how the composting process works and what's happening in the pile. And so therefore you can know if something's going wrong in your composting system, you'll know why, because you're understanding the compost pile and what is making it decompose, what's making it not decompose. So that's how we're going to focus on the composting system today. So carbon is the energy source, so the food for microorganisms. They're carbohydrates, and they provide energy just like carbohydrates provide energy for us. And then nitrogen provides the proteins and the enzymes that microorganisms need to break down the carbon for growth and to reproduce as fast as possible. So we need carbon and nitrogen coming together and touching each other in a certain type of ratio for the microorganisms to have everything they need to reproduce and to have the energy to reproduce and consume these elements. Water, every living thing needs water. Microorganisms, they have a coating around them and of water, and that's how they move about through the organic material, is with that coating of water. And so if we don't have the correct amount of water on a compost pile, things can really slow down. Microorganisms can go dormant or they can die. And then oxygen to prevent anaerobic bacteria from populating, to help maintain the good guys and to keep decomposition happening. This one in the composting world this specific element is really changing. We're trying to figure out how we can do composting almost without oxygen, or how we can incorporate oxygen in the composting system without turning, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well with that. But just the biggest one of the things to remember is that the bacteria that we want to grow in a compost pile are called anaerobic bacteria. They need oxygen. These are the good guys that we're trying to reproduce as fast as we can. And we get that oxygen in a compost pile through turning. Landfills have an anaerobic bacteria population, and that's what creates the methane and the greenhouse gases, because those type of bacteria create noxious gases. And so that's something that we're trying to stay away from. Now, there are anaerobic digesters that are becoming more popular now, where people can throw food scraps into this anaerobic digester and anaerobic bacteria eat it, and then they off gas the noxious gases. They're trying to experiment with all different things. My biggest thing about this is that if you're looking for a finished product of compost that's going to be really beneficial for the soil and for your garden, you're going to want to use an oxygen and aerobic a bacteria. You're in an aerobic pile because you don't want to put anaerobic bacteria onto your garden. And we'll discuss a little bit more of why that is. So carbon materials, it's going to be your green, your leaves, and we'll go over a little bit about that. But something that I like to point out with carbon materials that I'm finding through my years and years of composting is that if you get mulch deliveries to your farm or your house, and you find that they just delivered you some really oily cedar or pine or like black walnut, these are trees that are very oily, and you would want to let them off gas and let their oils dry up. So you would want that pile to sit out there. You want to turn your mulch and make sure that it can dry out a little bit before you would put that onto your compost pile, because those oils are kind of like they protect, those oils protect the trees from bad microorganisms and from pests. And if you put that into your compost pile, sometimes you can kill the microorganisms that you're trying to grow. We want to practice safe storage, so not storing your compost piles over 6 feet. This is because your carbon piles over 6 feet. And this is because they can get very, very hot on the inside. Sometimes if it's a fresh mulch carbon pile, they can have mixed in green material, and you have a perfect little compost pile there, and you'll take the temperature of it, and you're getting upwards of 100 to 65 to 175. And anything after 175, you're going to start producing bacteria that produces alcohols, and there's a chance of your carbon pile catching on fire. This happens quite frequently in industrial setting, where they'll have huge, huge carbon piles, and as soon as they go in to pick up a big scoop of it and they let oxygen in there, they can catch it on fire because it's just way too hot. So we want to avoid that. You most likely won't have that in your home setting, but if you're on a farm and you have large mulch piles, you need to be very careful about those and try to keep them no higher than 6 feet. Okay, so a little bit about nitrogen, your green waste. So you got the food scraps that you're collecting from your house, green materials, garden materials, landscape materials. And then you have your high nitrogen, which is anything that's going to be coming from animals. So their bones, their meat, their manure. And then when you're building a compost pile, which we'll kind of go into it here a little bit, but there is a recipe to it. And Dr. Elaine Ingham, her recipe is that you have 60% carbon, 30% nitrogen, and 10% high nitrogen. This type of recipe is for a compost pile that you're really trying to make the best compost that you can for your garden or for your farm. You add in a high nitrogen component so that you can get the compost pile up to temperatures that you need, which is anywhere between 135 to 165, and you keep them at that level for 15 days while you're turning the pile. So she has found that this recipe right here can make that happen. Another high nitrogen component can be alfalfa. As well. So if you can source that without a lot of like residual herbicides or pesticides on it, that's a good high nitrogen component as well. If you don't have high nitrogen, that's okay too. If you just want to compost at home and use your food scraps and your green waste, that is also okay. High nitrogen can change in your plant material as well. So like if you cut your grass in the early spring, your grass will be in a high nitrogen state because it just came up out of the ground. It has a lot of nitrogen in the new growth. And so when you take those grass clippings and you collect them after you mow, that is a high nitrogen component. Now, those grass clippings, if you mow again in the summer or the late summer, they are no longer a high nitrogen component because they don't have that boost from the early spring. And then you have sometimes high nitrogen components it depends on how healthy they are, but like your legumes from your garden, your peas, your beans. If you have clover, that can be a high nitrogen. A lot of it that can be a high nitrogen. These are things that are self-producing nitrogen as well. Do we have any questions on carbon or nitrogen material so far?
Not at this time, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat.
Okay. So ratio, when you look up composting online, you're going to see a lot of things about ratio. About compost piles needs to have a 30-to-1 ratio. And that is correct. But ratio is very hard to do. And it's also very hard to explain sometimes because there's a lot of scientific things behind a carbon and nitrogen ratio that we just can't go in today. But one of the things I want you to know is that it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to measure everything like exactly to get the carbon to nitrogen ratio perfect. The biggest thing I want you to remember is that I want you to see that wood chips right here, they're 400-to-1. Wood chips can be anywhere from 400 to 1,000-to-1. And sawdust is also very, very high carbon material. And then you look over here and you see leaves, 60-to-1. Sometimes leaves can be 30-to-1. Sometimes they can be like 100-to-1, depending on the leaf. And then you come down here and you see your vegetables. So just know that if you put a lot of wood chips in your pile and you're using only vegetables, you may have a lot of wood chips left over after the decomposition process has happened with your food scraps. And that's okay, because what this is showing you is that you're going to need a lot of nitrogen to break down that heavy carbon material. But if you use leaves, then you're not going to need as much nitrogen to break down that carbon material because it's only 60-to-1 versus 400-to-1. So that's something to remember if you only have a mulch material, and then just know that it is expected to see that mulch material at the end of your process, because you just won't have enough nitrogen material if you're in a home setting to break it all down. So what you can do is you just sift out all your good compost and you take that leftover carbon material, that leftover wood chips, and you put it back through the process again because it's been inoculated by tons of microorganisms. And you just keep reusing those wood chips until they have fully decomposed. So water, and this is a good little graphic that I love using here, is that watering at every layer when we're going to build a compost pile is extremely important. You can't really get water in the pile once you build it, and we'll go over that as well. 50% moisture content, and that feels like a wrung out sponge in your hands. So when you go and you're going to take the compost pile and you're going to squeeze it as hard as you can, and you'll see a couple drops of water coming out. You're at 50%. If you see, more than a few drops coming out after when you're squeezing really hard, then you're probably getting upwards of 60%, 65%. And then if you grab it and you have like a consistent like little stream, then you're upwards of 75, 80%, and you're getting too much water at that point. So 50% is what we're looking for. Feels like a wrung out sponge. We water when we turn, and then evaporation is a thing, which I'm going to explain to you why that is. So we always check moisture content. Right here, you can see that this is a little root. And then these are soil aggregates right here, and what makes up soil: sandstone, clay. And in this little area next to the root, this is an air pocket, which we talked about how important air is, and they exist with the water. This air pocket is actually holding up the sand, silt, and clay, your soil aggregate. And we're going to talk about that as well, how important that is, and to have air in your soil. And that's what makes it nice and fluffy, and how you get air in your soil by not tilling or not disrupting your garden or your farm. But the microorganisms you see, they're existing in the water pocket right here. And they're able to move around in the soil component with this water pocket. So if you don't have these water pockets in your compost, this is in the soil here, but if you don't have this in the compost, they cannot move around to eat and do their nutrient cycling. And graphic here shows, like, you know, if you have dry, you don't have a lot of microbial activity, the diversity is low. If this is optimals is 50% right here, you have a lot of microbial activity, you have reproduction that's going well, and everything is covered in no anaerobic bacteria. Now, this is if you have too much water. Now, when there's too much water, your activity of microorganisms in your decomposition, it does go down, because anaerobic bacteria, they don't decompose food scraps or carbon materials very quickly. They're very slow at it. So that's another thing to notice. Like, if your pile is going really slow, it could be that you have too much water. And you'll know that because it will start to be smelly. Because remember, anaerobic bacteria, they put off smells that are unpleasant. And that's another way you can know about their presence in your pile. So oxygen. So then that same with that graphic right here, there's oxygen holding up the sand, silt, and clay, making sure that the anaerobics have an opportunity to be amongst the oxygen, because they need that. And you get oxygen by turning often, or in some cases now, which is becoming really popular, we use force air in composting systems, which we can talk about if anyone has an interest in what that means, and ASP systems and how those work and such. And then a lack of oxygen is, you know, the pile's not heating up. It could be smelly. One thing to notice in composting systems is that if you have a finished product, or if you're going to buy compost and you notice that the compost is completely black, like super, super black, that is a sign that anaerobic bacteria will most likely present and help to break down that compost pile. So another thing to look for, because in a finished products should never be black. They should be brown, like a dark chocolate, like 70% dark chocolate bar color. And then if you have silvery compost or gray compost, that's another sign of anaerobic bacteria as well. Now, if a pile is getting too hot, turning is necessary. You have to turn the pile if it's getting too hot, and this will cool it down, and it will disperse your microbial count throughout the pile and introduce new carbon and nitrogen materials, and the pile will continue to heat up again, but you will have to cool it down through turning as well. So, signs of anaerobic bacteria. You, now we're going to go over saprophilic fungi, which kind of looks similar to this, but right now I'm showing you pictures of anaerobic bacteria. They create a little, almost looks like mold a little bit, but they're very speckly in compost piles. And when you go and open them up, sometimes they can have a foul smelling aroma. These type of bacteria also are the ones that make the earthy smell as well. So yeah, sometimes you'll see this present in like good compost, I mean like really earthy smelling compost. And as long as it gets turned in again and you incorporate some more water and it disappears, you'll be fine. Just know that if you see these guys in your compost pile, it's definitely time to turn it. And it can be fixed. Like, compost piles can always be fixed. You didn't ruin it if these were present. You just need to turn it and maybe incorporate some more carbon material so you can really start getting some airflow. So temperature in composting. We're in this um, workshop here, we're talking about thermophilic composting or hot composting. And if you're going to do hot composting, you need a thermometer here that I can show you. It's really helpful, and it's fun to have one of these with you and checking your compost pile all the time. You know, kind of, for me at least, it's really fun to go out there and see what it is, especially if you have kids, you know, and also to see that, hey, I made this compost pile with the correct recipe and now it's heating up. And I did a good job because it's showing you that you did a good job by heating up. Um, we want to be at 131 to 160 for 5 to 7 days to keep weed seeds and pathogens away. And we help maintain this by turning it, by making sure we have the correct recipe of nitrogen and carbon, and by the water, which we talked about. I have some, with me here, I have some thermometers. And if you guys see, this is the Rio temp. Here, I'll go to the next slide so you can see. I'll go there. This is the RioTemp, the Backyard Pro here. And it has in Fahrenheit. I like this one because it can show you the green where you're active at, and then where you're getting too hot and where there's no activity, which you can kind of see on this photo right here. Um, I've had this for many, many years. It's gone through lots of compost piles. It's never broke. Um, Kids handle it. It's very much worth the investment to have one of these in your house. And today we're going to raffle off one of those for you all. So the Compost Collective will be sending you one if you win the raffle today. Or raffle, or I don't know what you call it. Your name is going to go in. I was going to tell Hannah, you have to put everyone's name in a little bag and pull it out so we can see who's going to get some compost thermometers today.
Oh, do you want me to do that right now?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Thank
we'll
you.
do. We'll do.
This is a heavy duty one. And I wish I could be in person with you all so I could pass these around and you can hold it. It is heavy. This has that protective case around it, the handle. I appreciate the handle for big compost piles or when you're doing like hardware cloth style. And these ones I really like because they can be calibrated. On the very back, there is a little flathead back here that you would stick the tip of this into. Well, here, actually, let me take, it has a case on it. We make these cases for it because they're very big and they can be, it's not safe to just store the thermometer without the case. So we just have like a PVC piping right here that we have that has a thread at the end, and we can thread it into this and we store it in that. And outside of that, this is very, very big. You're not gonna be able to see it in the video how long this is. It's made for a pile that's 6 feet tall, or even taller, and it's very thick. And so this is an industrial size compost thermometer from RioTemp, and you can see the pricing there. But the calibration on these is really great because you can stick it in ice water and make sure it calibrates back down to zero. And then, because sometimes if you drive from site to site, or if you take this with you and you drive around with it, or if it gets jostled around a lot in your tool shed, that jostling could make it to where the gauge could be off a little bit. So calibrating it every once in a while is good for the thermometers. Okay, let me go back here and go a little bit over the thermophilic stages. Compost piles, they go up and down, and they should, because every time they go up and down, we're getting different types of microbial activity and diversity in the pile, and that's what we want for a really good composting system. So you'll see when you build it that it will go up in temperature and it will stay up there for a couple days, and then it might go down, and then you'll go, once you see it going down, you go out there and you turn it again, and then it's going to go up again because you've turned your pile and you've reincorporated new nitrogen to the center of the pile. And the center of the pile is where it's going to always be most active, and that's why we turn it. And so it goes up and down through these phases, and we want to see that in composting. And then it has a curing stage where you've turned it a few times, you don't see any food scraps anymore, and the curing phase is very, very important to make sure that you have a compost that's not going to hurt your vegetables or your garden material. So curing stage happens, we want to make sure that it gets the temperature of whatever it is outside, that it no longer goes up and down. And then once it's steady at that for a couple weeks, you can now apply it to your to your garden. If you apply hot compost to your garden, then you have a chance of burning your plants, and you don't want to do that. Now, if you're doing cold composting, you will not see these temperatures go up and down. You won't get to experience that. And cold composting is kind of like what my mom did when I was growing up. Is there's a mound of things in the very back of the house, backyard, all the way in the very back, and she throws stuff back there every once in a while. And maybe after a couple of years, she'll go back there and see if she has any soil. And she did. She had, she always had a little bit, and then she used that on her garden. But it took a couple of years to get there. And that's one of the downfalls with cold composting is that it needs to sit for a long time and it takes a long time for it to decompose. Now with thermal composting, we're looking at getting a finished product in 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes if you do it, if you're really good at it, you can get it in 4 weeks. And also the heat will help kill off seeds and pathogens. And they do say that sometimes with cold composting, it does a better job at holding nitrogen than the hot composting. And that's because sometimes if your compost pile gets really hot, it can off gas some nitrogen. But if you're turning and, adding water and trying to keep that within the pile, it shouldn't be a big difference there. So building the pile here, we build in a layer system. And you can see this example here. We have greens and browns that need to be touching each other along with the water. So you're watering it as you're layering it in to make sure that you reach that 50%. And it's best to do this all the way up to at least 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and 4 feet, 4 by 4 by 4 is what we're looking for. And that is because they've found that at this build, the pile can self-sustain itself. It can protect itself from heavy rainfalls. It can protect itself from extreme heat. It can protect itself from the cold. This is why you can have really hot compost piles in the winter, as long as they're at least 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide. They're like their own little city in there, and it's a protection. And if you're building at home and you want to be really mindful of how much money you spend on your pallet system is perfect for this because pallets are 4 by 4. And so when you have pallets stacked up, creating a nice little box, you're going to have the perfect size for an at-home composting system. So here I've added some color to this graph that was provided by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. So this is, if you're just going to do like a windrow or just a mound at your house, what best practices would be, to have some sort of carbon base, which I like to do cardboard and like a big thick stack of wood chips, like, 8 inches or so. And then I'll start building my compost pile in that. And then it always gets covered with the bio cover, which is mulch or leaves, or if you got lots of money, you can buy a bio cover that is like a tarp that's breathable. And no food scraps visible. That's like the number one thing. We don't want any food scraps visible. So if you have this bio cover here and you have this mixture correctly, this pile acts like a wood stove. I don't know if anyone's ever got to be around a wood stove that heats a house, or even like a campfire, I guess. There is air the pile will naturally pull in air from the bottom and then release the heat from the top. And it creates its own like cycling of air when it's built correctly. This is why it's really important to check the moisture in your compost pile, because this process right here, pulling in new air, heat coming out the top, is a way that compost piles dry out. So know that, it's kind of taking care. It's really cool how it's a living thing that's taking care of itself when it's built properly. So when you go to turn your compost pile, just remember you want to take this bio cover off, set that aside, and then you'll go and turn and then put your bio cover back on to protect it again. Another question I get all the time is like, what about critters getting into my compost pile? Well, my dog put his nose in the compost pile once when it was very active at like 150, and he never put his nose in there again because that was way too hot for him. And I live on a farm and we never have critters get into our compost pile because we keep it covered with the bio cover and we try to keep it active. And when it's active at high temperatures, it helps to keep them out. So here Here is a video of, if you've been to my workshops before, you've seen this video. I absolutely love this video. It's such a good way to show a compost building. And this was at the market farm many, many years ago with the community gardens. And I was teaching them how to do a compost build with a hardwood cloth system. And I really like hardwood cloth systems. They're not very expensive. They're very neat and clean, and you can watch the decomposition process happen. This hardwood cloth was 5 feet tall, and then we made it 4 feet wide, maybe a little bit wider, held together by bungee cords. And then you can see, then they just start layering it in. They are using a measuring system with this, which is those totes. So they'll have a tote of green material, and then they'll do like a half a tote of carbon. Because they're trying to go more of decomposition of getting their green material, and they have the resources to turn often. When you have the sources to turn often, then you can go a little bit heavier on the nitrogen. They also are adding in some finished compost to help inoculate the pile and get it going up to speed very quickly. That straw we had soaked with some water, because straw can sometimes take the moisture out of a compost pile because it's very dry. So we soaked it before we threw it in. Chopping up the food scraps and the green material is also really important, because microorganisms, they will have the ability to break down the green material if it is chopped up smaller. Having a really thick stalk that is not chopped up will just take the microorganisms a very long time to decompose. But if you can go ahead and help them out and chop it up to 4 to 6 inches for them, you'll have a finished process a lot faster. And they were able to fit almost all of their green, like, garden material into this pile, multiple bins of food scraps that they had collected, and also some of their noxious weeds. They let their weeds dry out in the sun to become a carbon material, and then they put it in the very center of the pile so that it can get heated up and get really, really hot, so that we don't have any issues with them to come back in the finished product through weeds or through rhizomes. And this, I want to say, it's sped up, of course, but I believe it took them about 45 minutes to do this. And I was teaching them along the way of how to do this. So I think that, if they did it again by themselves, it would go a lot faster for them. So you can see the layering system here as well. You'll see, you can see the, go back here. You can see the brown and the green, and then we have different types of carbon right here, where we have like having different types of carbon material is also really beneficial for your composting pile. It's going to create a better microbial diversity, and which will lead to better compost and better nutrient exchange for your plants. So they put this all the way up to the very tippy top, trying to fill in everything they possibly can, because when this decomposes, it will decompose drastically. We hope to get at least half of that hardware cloth at the end of finished product, because decomposition happens, and it's natural to see that the product just kind of shrinks down. But I like this process. It's clean. You can see it. You can see how it's decomposing through the process. It's easy to turn. That with turning, you would just undo the hardware cloth, and the pile stays there by itself, and you move it to the side, and then you just flip the whole compost pile inside out. Take the outside, put it on the inside, take the inside, put it on the outside. And this is because microorganisms are going to naturally come to the center, and where all the moisture and the perfect mixture is, and they're going to just start consuming and reproducing right here. And this is where you take the temperature. This is where it gets very, very hot, is right here. So when you turn, you want to take the pile, you want to take this material that didn't get touched by a lot of microbes, put it into the middle, and then put the outer layer on the outside, so that all these microorganisms that are right here will now come to the center and be happy again with all the new green and carbon material that they have. and they'll start decomposing this. And you want to keep this turning process. This is how you make sure that all of your compost pile gets touched by heat and microorganisms to properly decompose it and to get rid of all of the weed seeds. And it's really easy to do this with the hardware cloth method.
Justine, we have a question.
Okay.
Amber asks, what was the cloth called that you used for the bungee cords? Harbor cloth?
Yes, hardware cloth. That I know it has the craziest name. It's called hardware cloth. And you can look it up. You can get it like at Ace Hardware. Sometimes you can order it in at Lowe's or Home Depot. It comes in different sizes. You can get them 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall, and then different types of widths. I recently purchased a roll that was 4 feet tall. And because I didn't want the 5 feet tall, because I'm only 5'4", and that would be way too hard for me. So 4 feet tall, and it got me 3 hardware cloth systems once I cut it, because I cut it to make a circle about 4 feet. So I got 3 of those, and that cost me $75. And prices on any sort of lumber or like metal materials, that they're always fluctuating. Sometimes it can be 85, sometimes it's 65, and sometimes you can find a deal. But the hardwood cloth, it will last you a long time. And then you just use bungee cords to hold it together. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So that was composting really, really like fast. Like sometimes I use like to take the whole 2 hours just talk about composting. That's not what we're going to do today. That was like, we're going to also talk about microorganisms and soil life and relationship between all this. So at the end here, if you have any composting questions, please tell me, and we can go back over composting again. But I want to make sure I have time for also this fun part. So we build compost piles the way we do so that we have a large diversity in microorganisms, because what we're doing is we're trying to create an environment where they thrive. And you can see in this little video I have microorganisms in a microscope. The little round guys are going to be testate amoeba that are kind of swimming around this is all sped up too, and they're swimming around trying to consume bacteria, and then when they digest it and put it back out through their system, it is in a plant available nutrients. It's a plant available form, and they are part of what's called the soil food web, which is what we're going to talk about, and they're extremely important. And then you see that little wiggly guy. Hopefully you guys can see. I have another image where you can see them. That's a nematode. Looks like he's stuck on some sort of plant, like organic material. Sometimes that can happen when you put them in a microscope in a slide. They can do all these kind of weird things. We see some fungal hyphae in there, which we'll talk about. So we're going to talk a little bit about nematodes, protozoa, fungi, bacteria, and how they provide nutrients for the plant. So here's another image, another video. In this one, you'll see like some wiggly nematodes. Hopefully. Uh-oh. Let's see if I can get this going here. There we go. So the ones that are kind of wiggling their tail around, those are nematodes. And nematodes, there are different types of nematodes. There are bacteria feeders, there's root feeders, there's predatory. And the nematodes can get a bad rap sometimes because everyone thinks about the root feeding nematodes, the ones that are going to eat my tomato plants. Well, realistically, the root feeder nematodes, they have the smallest population of the nematode family, and they're not very common. And the reason why you would have a root feeding nematode in your soil to begin with would be because your whole soil food web is so thrown off that the bad guys were able to come in and populate the area, and you didn't have a balanced system. Like there's certain type of fungal hyphae that will eat root feeding nematodes. And they exist in the composting process. So when you have a lack of nutrients in your soil, or you notice that you're having a lots of disease issues, a lot of pest issues, your soil is really compacted, this is because the soil food web underneath the soil is not balanced. You're having an issue with either too much bacteria, too little bacteria, too much fungi. You don't have enough of diversity in nematodes or protozoa. Something is happening in the soil food web that's off. That's allowing one type of microorganisms to thrive, which is never good because we need that diversity. So, soil food web decomposers. It first starts with bacteria and fungi. Now, bacteria have a low carbon and nitrogen ratio. They're the ones that's going to be really consuming your green material the easiest. They are the decomposers. And then we have the fungi, and you can see them. You can see saprophilic fungi, and I'll show you a picture of those in compost and in the forest floor. They're the white, like very stringy material that you can sometimes see in mulch and in the forest. They decompose carbon materials and turn them into soil. And then you have the mycorrhizal fungi, which is the one that's really popular now. A lot of scientific research has been shown to prove their existence under the soil. They're the network that trees communicate on, that a lot of plants communicate on. There are some plant kingdoms that do not communicate on with mycorrhizal fungi, and that would be the Brassinaceae, the brassica plants, which is broccoli and cabbage. They don't really use this type of network. So they don't really care to have fungal dominated soil. But outside of that, this balance of fungi and bacteria is very, very important. And you can see right here is a fungal strand. This is what we're looking for in a microscope. It has these, we tell by the uniformity in the strand, by the certain color, by these borders right here. They will have a specific distance between each one of these borders. And that's what we're looking for in a microscope when we're analyzing compost and soil. So here is the saprophilic fungi I was telling you about. I absolutely love these guys, and they're so much fun to show in person. And you can go out in the forest and find them, and they will show up in your compost pile if you have mulch that came from an area of like a healthy tree. They normally tend to exist around there. So you can see they have some strands and like a little webbing. And these are really important. We want to keep them in our pile. We want to be gentle with them, and we want them to exist in our soils. Now, if you till or turn over or work your soil too much, you won't have these guys in your soil because they're very delicate to disruption. Another reason why we don't want to till. And then protozoa and nematodes. So right here is a testate amoeba. Oh, right here, it has a little shell that it kind of goes into, and it will come out to eat this bacteria. You'll see another one over here. It looks kind of like a little olive. We want to see these guys. Sometimes they could be naked without their shell, and they look like a really funny blob moving around. Now celiacs, they right here, these can be considered anaerobic conditions sometimes, so we don't want to see a lot of those. And I don't have a video of those right now. Nematodes, like I was telling you, we identify them from their mouth parts, so bacteria, fungal, predatory omnivores, root feeders. The soil food web can be a whole lecture of its own. And if you are interested in learning more about the soil food web and microorganisms and how they work together, we did a really great workshop with Troy from Living Roots Compost Tea. He is an expert in microscope and soil food web, and it is on the Springfield Community Gardens YouTube channel. It's called Compost Under a Microscope. I highly recommend checking it out if you're interested in learning more about microorganisms and how they work in the soil and how in their role. And then because we look at different types of soil in a microscope in that workshop. So check that out if you're interested in for a little bit more detail. Okay. So why is all of this important, right? Why are we talking about microorganisms and fungi and making sure that we um, we are growing them, we're having the correct compost for them? It's because we have found out that this is how plants become drought tolerant. This is how plants fight off disease. This is how plants become healthy, is that they have a relationship with the microorganisms and the fungi in the soil. They are the ones that are going out and getting the nutrients and bringing it back to the plant. So right here you can see there's a fungal hyphae, and it will create a relationship with the plant, and the plant will be saying, hey, and in exchange, what happens is the plant will give the fungal hyphae carbon materials, right? And because it makes carbohydrates with using water and sun and, so on and so on. That's another plant lecture. Just know that it produces these sugars, and they're called exudates, and they share them. They share 80% of the sugars that they create with the microorganisms and the fungi in the ground. And that's what's happening right here, is that they will create a network with the plant. The plant will say, hey, I really need potassium, or I really need more nitrogen, or I really need, this type of material, this type of element. Can you please help me? And it will go out and get that, mine it for it, and bring it back to the plant in a form that the plant can consume. Now, the reason why for the longest time we didn't believe in this type of relationship with plants, I mean, even when I was going to college, over a decade ago, I did not learn this. That this was like there there was still kind of up and coming with Dr. Elaine. People were trying to kind of shut her down a little bit on this research, because now that we know how microorganisms and fungi communicate with the plant, all the synthetic pesticides and herbicides are no longer needed. And what's really needed is compost, because that is basically the nutrients that the plant needs, right? So they were shutting this information down and not allowing it to get out, because it would put the synthetic nitrogen businesses like out of business, because we wouldn't need them anymore. So what happens is if you use a lot of synthetic nitrogen or synthetic feeding fertilizers for the plants, it kills the microorganism, and the plant no longer can create this relationship with the microorganisms, and it solely relies on that synthetic nitrogen then. Well, the plant itself, when that comes into play, the plant now doesn't have the ability to communicate with the microorganisms that help protect it from if it gets attacked by a disease, or if a pest. It only has the network to take up these synthetic chemicals. So now we have disease issues and drought issues with our plants, because we have taken away its ability to reach out into the soil to get the networks that it needs. So if I play this video one more time and show you the bacteria side of it now, the bacteria and the fungi are at the base of the soil food web. They're all around. They're going to be the first ones in the food web of the soil. And so nematodes come along and different types of protozoa, and they eat the bacteria, and they release nitrogen and the elements that the plant needs in a plant available form that then the plant could take up. That's why this relationship of those microorganisms in the soil is so important. So if you lack microorganisms in the soil, then you're going to lack this exchange of elements that the plant needs in the plant form. And so you may think, my plant's not doing well, it needs more nitrogen, or it's showing that it needs more potassium, or it needs this. Well, really what it needs is it needs more microorganisms to eat the bacteria, to release the nutrients that's already there into a form that the plant then can take up. And that's what this is showing on this side right here. It's showing that it's communication. Now, it will put out sugars again, and the bacteria will eat these sugars, and this will attract more protozoas and nematodes to come into that area to eat these guys, and then nutrients is coming out. Along with this exchange too, it shows you that we didn't talk about is this living and dying process of these organisms and these fungal hyphae. They create soil, and I'm going to show you some slides on that as well. They are the building block of soil. Dead material, dead microorganisms, dead macroorganisms in the compost. They are what helps to create soil, and do it. They can do it very, very quickly. So that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. The biggest part to take away from this right here is that microorganisms are the key to having healthy plants and healthy soil. Without them, the nutrient exchange process is not going to be where it needs to be for a healthy plant to thrive. Okay, so real quick here, I'm going to try, before we get into this compost study that I was doing, I want to tell you a little bit about how soil works. So let me go up here. I'm going to hope that I can do this here. Hopefully I don't have any technical difficulties. I'm going to switch I'm going to switch here. Okay. Can you see a slide that says growing soil? I don't know if you're there, Hannah. Can you see this, a new slide that says growing soil? Uh-oh. Uh-oh, are you guys still there? Uh-oh, say that again. Uh-oh, let's see. Hannah, are you there? You're muted if you are speaking. Oh no. Hopefully I didn't. It says I have network. I don't know if anyone in the.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, it says that I have an unstable connection. What was your question?
I just want to make sure you guys switch presentations. Can you see a slide that says growing soil?
What I see right now, yes, I can see it now. Yeah.
Okay, great. I want to make sure that's what everyone is looking at.
My connection is really, for some reason, very unstable, but yeah, I see it.
Okay. All right, great. So this right here is on a farm that implemented regenerative agriculture practices. So the soil, which we'll talk about, the soil was never bare. They used covered crops. They stopped tilling, and sometimes they integrate animals onto the property. And the biggest thing I want to show you right here is this is where their soil, what it used to be right here. It's compacted clay. It doesn't have much of a clay color, but it is. And then from there up, right, and he's showing you how much soil he has grown by using compost, cover crops, and not tilling. And this right here is a daikon cover crop. It's called groundhog cover crop that they use in fields in between, and it goes into the ground. It helps break up this compaction, and then they let it decompose, which then feeds the microorganisms and helps grow more soil. But look at this beautiful soil difference right here, just from them introducing compost, cover crops, and no tilling. I mean, I absolutely love this image just to show what's capable. Okay, so what is soil? Soil is air, water, sand, silt, and clay. Also, it has a component of soil organic matter. Ideally, we would love to have our soil organic matter at 10%. Sometimes we're lucky if it's at 5. Most of the time, we're looking at 3, 2, 4, which is not ideal for gardening. That makes it really hard. But just know that there's air, water, sand, silt, and clay in soil. And we're going to go a little bit more here. So sand, silt, and clay is what soil is made up of. We have different types. There's different ranges depending on the region that you're in. You may have more of a clay soil. You may have more of a silt soil. You may have more of a sand soil. Or you can have a beautiful mixture of it all, and you can have perfect loam soil. But right here is, so clay is very fine. It's the smallest particle. Then you have silt, which is in the middle, and then you have sand, which you can see. Sandy soils are going to be down like south. Clay is kind of, I mean, in Missouri we have a lot of clay soils, and we also, surprisingly, we do have a lot of areas that have silt as well. So this is showing you what is in the organic material part and why it's so important. So inside that 5%, we have living organisms, we have dead organisms, we have actively decomposing parts, and then humus, which is a thing that we're creating when we're creating really good compost and mixing it in with soil. This is what we want to increase, and we do this by adding good compost and cover crops. So I really like this image here. It kind of helps me to explain what is happening in our soils right now. So this is a soil that is that has some good topsoil on it, or compost. You can kind of see the divided line here. Soils have different horizons, but you can see how this has a really good topsoil. This top part of soil, by the way, is where most of the microorganisms are going to live. When we get really down low, it's hard for microorganisms to live in such a lack of oxygen compacted area. They do live down there, but they're not as densely populated. They're going to be mostly populated up here. Another reason not to disturb your soil or till too heavily, because this is where they all hang out. And if you kill them, then you're losing your population for that nutrient cycle that we're looking for. So this is an ideal world right here, where you had 10% soil organic matter. This is what a lot of us are looking at. This picture is a little exaggerated because it is a type of soil that they're looking at, but this person is like heavily tilled their field to where it was probably just dust, and then a heavy rainfall came and turned it into clay. But this is a common thing in ag, and it also in a garden that has been tilled over and over. And what happens is we have diminished the air pockets in this from heavy tilling. And all the soil aggregates, they're gone. They got broken up. All the microorganisms, they're gone because they were killed through the through the tilling process and lack of air. And so when you add, and Hannah probably is good for this too, being a ceramics expert, when you add water to clay, it makes it very hard and like thick and like compact. There's not a lot of air in that material, and that's what's happening right here, because the clay particles are so fine. They're very, very, very fine. They're like dust, and when you add water to it, kind of like flour, you're gonna have this material that doesn't have a lot of oxygen in it, and it's very hard to work with. So there's a farmer called Gabe Brown, and then you can look him up. He's a beautiful example of how to convert to a more regenerative practice. And he did this on his farm, and he went from 2% to 70% soil organic matter. And his water holding capacity was absolutely huge. By the end of his, I want to say 4 to 6 year experiment with using regenerative agriculture practices, he ended up holding more water in his soil than his local aquifer, which is huge. He ended up going from having 100,000 more gallons per acre of water holding ability in his soil. Because remember, really good soil and compost can hold more water in it. It has the airways and the air pockets to hold water. It has the soil aggregates to hold water. It has all the organic material to hold water in the soil. It has a better balanced ecosystem. And we do this by putting in place principles, which is least disturbance as possible, putting in living roots, having a soil armor, so having your soil cover at all times, and having roots in the ground at all times. Because remember, This feeds the microorganisms, these roots, this relationship with the plants. When this is not here, the microorganisms will go dormant or they will die. So always having living roots in the ground is really important to a healthy soil. Also protects the soil from the sun and heavy rainfalls. And then if you can, they want animal integration, but this is for big agriculture or farms, allowing animals to come and graze every once in a while, and then incorporating some sort of biodiversity into your farm. And so again, we do this through no tilling or disturbance of the soil, definitely no chemicals, because we talked about how they kill microorganisms and completely mess up the plant's ability to have a communication system with the microorganisms in the ground. Bare soil, we don't want that. It makes it way too hot for microorganisms to exist, and you get huge runoff issues. Your soil basically runs off the ground whenever it rains. So we want to keep roots in the ground and plants covering it to prevent erosion and the rain taking it away. And then not overgrazing, this is more on the animal line. Okay, so let's go back over here and share this tab instead. And let's talk a little bit about this awesome research project we did with Missouri State University. Okay, do we have any questions?
Not at this time, but now would be a great time to questions if you guys do.
Yes, we're almost done, and then I'll have some time for questions and such. Please feel free to ask away. I know it's a lot of information all at once.
Raffle.
So what?
And the raffle.
Oh yes, and the raffle. We got to do that too. Okay. So we did this composting study with Missouri State University grad students where they had the ability with some new equipment to look at the nutrient content in plants. And so we wanted to plant green onions and look at the nutrient content and what we did was we had a row full of compost that was just done with this was compost just of like green, like yard waste and mulch. This right here is just mulch material. And then this right here was compost made with food waste and mulch. I will say that this was about, 6 or 7 years ago we did this research project. Now if I would do it again, I would have definitely had my control group over here because we did not remember that, which is very important in research studies. They were kind of using this mulch as their control group, but it would have been nice to have another bare one over here. So this field right here, we were looking at several different things. This field was so heavily tilled, which you can see over here a little bit, that it was just like nasty, like light grayish soil with barely any life and very dusty through tillage. So we were trying to look at how the soil rejuvenated itself with compost application, and then how the soil reacted with its relationships to the green onions and what it could produce in the time of like fixing the overtilled soil while also producing a healthier crop. And what we found was that the plants in the row with the food waste compost produced a more nutrient green onion than these two rows with the compost in it. So what we found is that when we create a diversity of nitrogen materials in a compost pile, it produces a healthier crop. This one right here, these all did better as far as, having a better soil underneath, like from these soil samples of nothing barely to having better soil here, they all did better. The food waste one was a lot higher in microbial count, microorganism count, and had a more diversity of microorganisms in the food waste row. So again, we got to prove that food waste compost remains superior over mulch and over just landscaping compost. And so this study was really cool. One of the first that Missouri State University did many years ago. I hope they've done more since then, but it was on the beginning path to prove that when you add compost to an overtilled agriculture system or to a garden, we are creating more nutrient dense foods for ourselves, which is extremely important because I mean, I would want to eat a green onion that's going to provide me more nutrients than a green onion that's not going to provide me more nutrients. And we can do that all by just an application of really good compost to our garden or to our agriculture fields. So, just to kind of wrap things up, so we have some time for questions in the raffle. We want to go over a couple things for composting best practices because I get this all the time. We want to make sure we check the temperature 2 to 3 times a week. Every day is best if you can. Be great. Location, we a location that is close to your house. Don't put it all the way in the back of your field. You're never going to want to go hang out with it. Your compost pile is like your garden, and we want to be able to have a good distance to that garden, to that compost pile, so we use it often. We don't want out of sight, out of mind, basically. And then it's alive, so treat it like your garden pet. Turn as much as you can. Once a week is great, but base it off of temperature, 50% moisture content, like we talked about, and then always keep your nitrogen covered. Never let it be exposed. That's how compost got a bad rap to begin with. That's what kind of makes it smelly, and two is if you just have it hanging out, mold in the open environment. We always want to have it covered with carbon so that it can do its proper decomposition. Finished product. What should it look like when it's finished? This picture right here in the background is a pretty good example. Smells like the forest floor, an earthy smell. There's no food scraps or nitrogen. It has cooled down to an ambient temperature. It's not hot. The moisture content is still there. Remember, it's alive and it needs water. And then it has a dark chocolate bar color to it. So this is how you tell if you're going to have if your product is finished. Now, if you're looking to see about like how to look for compost when you're purchasing it, I did do a workshop for the community gardens when we went over how to do that, and there's videos on how to do that as well in that workshop. And if you are interested in how you're supposed to do that, if we have time, I can go over that with you too. Like how do I know if the product that I'm buying is good? There are ways to go about that. If you buy compost in a plastic bag, the plastic bag has to have air holes because if it's completely sealed, then it's dead. There's no microorganisms in there because it's probably been hanging out in the sun for a long time, overheating, and the microorganisms have either died off or gone dormant or most likely died off. And it's probably going to be very black inside. So you want air to it and moisture content still. So what do we do if our pile has a bad odor? We look at it and we analyze if it's too wet, if it's too tight, if it's growing anaerobic bacteria, which we saw a picture of. When you're trying to figure out what's happening with your pile, you want to look at one thing at a time, and you want to address one issue at a time. So if you open your pile and you see, hey, I'm not decomposing very well. Well, first you want to add some water to it to see if that's the issue. So add water, come back in 2 days and see if it's decomposing again. If that wasn't it, okay. Well, now maybe it needs more nitrogen. So next round, add some more nitrogen. But if you go to your pile and you see that it's not decomposing and you add nitrogen and you add water, and then you come back and you're like, oh, this is great. Well, you don't know what was actually wrong with it because you just added you just did two things at once. And when you're in the beginner process of building a compost pile, it's best to do one thing first, so then you can really learn how the pile works and what actually was wrong with it at that time. So do one thing at a time, then come back and check on it. What if the pile is not composting? Moisture is probably needed. Nitrogen, carbon. If it has a bad odor, it needs to be turned. If it's not hot enough, it could be too small and or not enough oxygen. The carbon to nitrogen ratio could be off a little bit as well. So what we were talking about here with all this is like, a lot of people say, well, I only go out and build my compost pile one layer at a time, which is fine. I have a compost pile here at my house where I do that as well, where I fill up a 5-gallon bucket and then I go out and add it and then add in my little bit of carbon and I fill it up slowly. And that is okay too, because I mean, I live in a household of 5 people, 2 kids and 2 adults, and we could fill up a compost pile in about we eat a lot of vegetables. So, maybe in a few weeks, and once that pile gets all the way up, we we turn it into a middle like, well, I can show you some piles here. We turn it and we look it over and we make sure it has water, and then we keep that decomposition process going. So it is a little bit different when you're just doing like at home and you're adding to it slowly. But know that you still can implement these processes and this type of thermal composting when you're doing it at home. Okay, so what time is it? It's not 5:30, sorry. 7:30. Okay, this is question time. I do have quite a few slides and I can show you if you all are interested. I'll need some communication from you all. If you want to see more information about static aerated, windrow, 3-bin, or hardware cloth, I have some slides here for that, and I can show you pictures and go over it if anyone's interested. If not, we could just do some questions about soil microbes or soil food web or anything. I am here for your composting needs. So ask away. If you feel very fulfilled and full, like this was like overwhelming and that's already I'm already, at my limit, then that's great too. This will be available for you to look at on their YouTube channel. So we can do the raffle real quick, Hannah, and you can pick some names. And then we can go on if there's anyone out there that wants to see some images on composting styles. This book right here, though, Teaming with Microbes, we're going to raffle off one of these. One of my favorite gardening and composting books out there. They use Dr. Elaine methods and they teach about it in here in the soil food web. And it's in a term that everyone can understand. You don't have to be a soil biologist or an expert. You'll be able to understand this. So I'm gonna raffle off one of these, and I'm gonna raffle off a compost thermometer as well. So get you guys, both of these will get you guys started and get you excited about the soil and composting.
Okay, folks.
Okay.
Ceramic vessel here. All the names.
Oh, we can't. You might have to type the name. Oh, wait. Is it me? Oh, it's just me. Am I sorry? You go ahead. What did you say?
Do what?
Did you say the names?
Oh, yeah, I can say the names.
Sorry, I didn't.
I'm gonna butcher these names. I'm terrible at pronouncing. We got Karina Hansen. We've got Lacey Lee. We've got Amber French, Cheryl Spalding, Josephine Goodenow, and Connie Kirkpatrick. All right, mix it up. Do some twists here. All right, what are we raffling off first?
We can do the compost thermometer.
Composting? Okay. Right. And the winner is Cheryl Spalding. Cheryl Spalding.
Yay! Compost. All right. Cheryl, I'll need you to email me. I could put my email here in the. How do I do that? Can I do that?
What's your email?
Justine at sgfcompost.org.
All right. So I just put the
There we go.
email in the webinar chat.
Yes, please email me your address so I can send this to you. Thanks for attending, and hopefully this helps get the composting going. Okay, now who's getting the
I'm just gonna
book?
in the chat so that if the person looked away for a second, they know that they won.
Oh yeah.
Just quick note, Justine, how are you doing with the fires up north?
Oh, we're doing good. We're safe.
No,
We're good.
no bad AQI or anything?
Nope. Yeah, surprisingly. And you might wonder why Hannah's asking. That's because I am in California. So
All right. And the winner of the, what is the other one?
the book, the Teaming with Microbes book.
Teaming with Microbooks. The winner of the raffle is Josephine Goodenow.
Josephine. All right. I love that name, Josephine. Okay. Please email me and I will get these sent your guys' way. Awesome. Do we have any questions? I think someone raised their hand.
We don't have any questions in the chat. And I don't see a raised hand.
Well, I think Cheryl has raised her hand.
Oh, there we go. Yep. Okay. Cheryl, I just unmuted you so that you can talk.
Oh, wait. I think it's muted. There you go. It's unmuted now.
All right, Cheryl. Do you have a question? Winner of the raffle?
Mhm. Okay. It looks like people are kind of heading out. Well, if anyone has any questions, I can stay on here for a little bit, or if you want to go over types of composting styles, I can stay on here for that too. But you're gonna have to let me know. I can't. Let me see if I see anything. I don't think I see any questions here. Oh, Hannah, you're muted if you're talking to me.
Oh no. As you guys leave, feel free to fill out today's evaluation form or visit us on springfieldcommunitygardens.org. Oh, we have a question from Amber French. If you would like to go over the other composting styles, I would appreciate it. If not, that's fine too.
Oh yeah, of course. That's what I'm here for. Okay. Well, we have someone interested, so let's talk a little bit about some different types of systems here. So the first one that I have some pictures of right here is called a static aerated. This is becoming very popular in the composting world because you don't have to turn your compost piles with these. The static aerated pile is where it's a thermophilic composting system that's being accelerated and managed through pushing or sometimes pulling air through a compost pile. And this requires having a blower, PVC piping with holes in it, which you can see in this image right here. They have holes in this pipe. And a little tiny house, which you protect the blower, electricity, and a little bit more cost up front. But you put the compost. Well, you have to cover these tubes right here with mulch. It's very important that you have a big pile of mulch all over this. And then you layer in your food waste and your mulch and makes a sort of windrow, or sometimes now they are doing these in like a box system, like, which we'll go over, and it's on a timer and it pushes air through. When you have a timer set up to where if you want it every 30 seconds, every 2 minutes, every 5 minutes, and it does the system that comes on, pushes air through, and then it's done. And the idea with this is that you don't have to turn your compost pile as much, and they're finding that it is very effective and a great way to compost materials that are less strenuous for people. The only thing is you need a large amount of like green material to make this happen. I am getting ready to experiment on my farm with making a box, like multiple boxes with this type of system in it, to see how well it's working. I have some friends around the area that have been doing it for a few months and they're having success. So I'm going to try as well. So that's aerated, and this is also, they do this on large facilities too. So next one is windrow style, which is what you're going to see in a big, like industrial size facilities, and also small. When I first started the compost collective and we were processing our own food waste, I did windrow style just like this, where you pile on fresh ingredients to the windrow every week, and then you cover it with mulch, and you create this long windrow, kind of like right here, of compost. And then you have a finished product at the end. They have windrow turners like this one up here. This is a small one. They have humongous ones for big facilities that go through and turn the pile. But this is like a little tractor one that goes through and you make sure the pile fits perfectly in here. It sprays it with water and it turns it all up. And the thing with this, and remember that picture I showed you, it's a good way to make sure your pile's all mixed up. You just have to make sure that you completely cover these piles with carbon, that there's absolutely no food scraps going. And sometimes they can have a little bit of a runoff issue with this type of style, but that's to be expected. So this is a windrow style. It's good for large amounts of food waste that you're going to be at. If you have to add it weekly, like on a farm, you have lots of food waste that you keep adding, or lots of green scraps, a windrow style would be good for that. Very easy to turn too with that style. Kind of going over, with this, 4 to 6 feet high, definitely not higher than 6 feet. In industry size, definitely no higher than 8 feet. It needs compacted ground and then also bio cover. So this is a large 3-bin system. If you're on a farm and you have a tractor, this is another way you can compost, where you basically have like a 3-bin system where you kind of turn your pile into it. You start off right here, adding in all your materials, and then once that gets up to temperature and has been sitting there for a few days and you're ready to turn, you turn to this section, let that get up to temperature, let it sit there for a week, turn to this section, and so on, so on. I really like how people have built these. If I had the money, I would do something similar to this on my farm. It's very organized. They do say that new style of cement blocks, unfortunately, are having some bad chemical issues, and heavy rainfall and over time can leach into soils and into the compost pile, which is really sad that we're now making cement and concrete blocks like this. And back in the day, they didn't make cement that leached out toxic chemicals to soil and microorganisms. So you do have to be careful about that when you're using this style, and if you're in a heavy rainfall area, and where you're sourcing your cement blocks from. This is a pole barn style where they're protecting it from the rain, so they have to control they don't get any rainfall on. This is more of like what you would have to do if you were in a facility and you had regulations to follow. So this is a small 3-bin system. This is what the Compost Collective loves to teach people how to do at home. It's a great at-home system. You can either do 2, like this picture right. I look right here. You can even have 1 if you want, or you can do 3. I love 3 because by the time you turn your pile here, after this pile, you probably only have 1 more turn, and then it's ready to go. you know, or like they have it set up to where by the time it's right here, it's finished, which is fine too. So something like this is really nice. I like how it has the mesh wire, like that hardwood cloth in between to promote airflow. Because if you don't put a forced air system in this, like an ASP system, sometimes people will put them in these styles. You have to make sure that your bin that you're building has airflow accessibility to it. Because if you build this where it's airtight and you seal it all the way up, it's not going to be able to have that nice air circulation that it needs to have. You're cutting that off, and your pile is most likely to go anaerobic. So just be careful when you're building things like this. You want to make sure you have these gaps and it has access to airflow. You also want to make sure you can make it easy on yourself to turn it. You know, like these gates, look like these gates can come off, which is nice. You don't want to put a wall up to where you can't get in there and turn it easily. You always want to have an open area so you can pull it out, turn it, put it back in, or pull it out and then put it back into that next bin. So this is probably my favorite style for at-home composters. Here's some more examples. I love this with how this wood can come off on all sides if you want, which is really nice, and it provides really good airflow. I like that these these poles are in the ground so it can hold the composting system really well. This one is ultimate airflow right here. This is when you have something like this too. This does happen, which is really great with this system, is that you have tons of microorganisms in this pile, right? So these microorganisms will help to inoculate your pile over here and decompose this pile faster. So that's what happens in windrow systems as well, is because you're always adding on to the end, so your microorganisms can move around and they can move to this next pile, and you'll have a faster decomposition rate than piles that are separate like this. And just, you know, a little benefit from something that's like this. I like this system too with these wood slats that come in the front. They're really wanting to make sure nothing gets in it, it looks like, and with having this big lid and these slats on, which is fine. I do like to try to tell people to keep this lid open as much as you can. And then obviously you would shut it, you know, during heavy rainfall, or if it was like, if you live in an area that has a lot of sun that could possibly dry out your pile, but they still have good airflow in the back and on the sides. And then here we talked about that hardware cloth style. Here's a picture of it. This, again, will be one of the fastest ways you can get finished compost. It does keep the critters out, which is nice because they have a hard time going into that hardware cloth. Now, I will say, you know, they could probably climb up it if they wanted to and try to hop in the top of it. But I've never seen that happen because remember, this pile heats up really fast. And if something hops in, that pile is 155 to 160 degrees, they're not going to be happy. They're going to get out really quickly. When you do this type of pile and you're using food scraps and food waste, you want to make sure that you put that more like towards the center of the pile and you don't have it exposed on the outside. Because you see how you can have this, we see the outside materials here. When we were putting food scraps in this, we made sure that we didn't have any of it visible on the outside because that can kind of vector flies and issues as well. But like I said, the temperature makes it to where, you know, you're not going to have larvae growing in there and you're not going to have fly issues. And then the constant turning of it, again, you're not going to have, at the end, you might have like roly-polies or some other like worms and stuff come into it if it's sitting there and it's finished. And that's okay. You know, they're adding castings to your soil. So they're definitely okay to be in your compost pile. And then easy turning with this one. You undo it, move it over to the side, turn all this over back into it again, and now you've turned your compost pile. And then you just keep doing that. Just keep going back and forth until you have a finished product. So those were some of the images that I had for this lecture for ways to do composting systems at home or on your farm. Any questions about that?
I don't see any questions at this time. Amber says, thank you. Thank you, Amber.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for asking. I like questions.
Does anyone else have any questions?
And I'm gonna go back here.
Cheryl, your hand is still raised. Cheryl, do you have any questions? All right. Well, this has been a lovely chat.
Oh, yeah, it was great to see you, Hannah, and thank you for having me, Springfield Community Gardens. And if you have any questions, you can, she put my email in the chat. You can always reach out. I love answering composting questions. And then if you're interested in what we do and you're curious about our service that we provide to residents or to businesses, you can reach out to us at the SGF Compost Collective at gmail.com or go to our website. Also, Troy Hinkie at Living Roots Compost Tea, he makes some of the best compost in the country. He does vermicomposting as well, and he also does soil and compost analysis through his microscope. His website, Living Roots Tea, is a great resource. You can go on there and you can set up where you send off your compost or soil to him, and he will give you a very detailed soil food web analysis and return it to you with also like requests and like ideas of how to fix your soil if you're wanting to incorporate different types of microorganisms into your soil life. And then you could also buy a specific type of compost to make compost tea from him, because we didn't really talk about like there are different types of compost depending on what application you're looking for. Like you can make a compost for specifically trees or specifically market gardens. Right. What we did today was just a overall healthy compost for all life. But bacteria and fungi, they produce different enzymes and slimes around their body that changes the soil pH. That's how soil pH actually changes in the soil, is because of bacteria and fungi. So if you want a certain soil pH for your plants, you would try to grow compost that has specific bacteria or fungi in it to help you change that soil component. And he can do that for you and help you in that process as well. So like I said, I can go on forever and ever, but thank you so much for attending this composting workshop with me and the community gardens. And please reach out if you have any questions.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Justine.
Yeah.